Good morning and welcome back to We the Future. Today we're going to be talking about the events that took place on January 6th, 2021. Hopefully you're familiar with it because today we're not just going to talk about what happened and the media's narrative that they decided to run with. We're going to be talking about what actually happened. We're going to be diving deep into new testimonies, new leaked information, and information that has now finally been released to the public after being withheld for all of these years. That and a personal story over the weekend of being attacked as a Christian. We'll get to that and much more. I'm Bryce Wheeler, and this is We the Future. All right, let's dive into it. The topic today, in my opinion, is extremely important. It's important for a couple of different reasons. To me, it's important because the events that took place on January 6th, 2021, were hailed and painted in the media as one of the most horrific attacks on personal and individual freedom. It was an attack on our government, an attack on the freedoms and the proper rule of law that we hold dear based off of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, and all of the other important founding documents. It was an attack on members of the House, members of the Senate, and it was an attack on what we hold dear, which is our fair presidential elections and the entire process that those go through, both before, during, and after we vote. Now, I want to say this before we begin. There's a lot of thoughts that I have and a lot of information that I need to try to portray and get across to you, the viewer. So bear with me, stay strong, and as I fumble through this information and do my best to make sure that you understand it, I appreciate your patience, and I appreciate you sticking with us. I first want to talk about this. Conspiracy theories. Conspiracy theorists. People who deem people as bad or not trusting, or people with tinfoil hats on that are waiting for a spaceship from a faraway planet to come and rescue us lizard people who are stuck and stranded here on planet Earth. I want to say this. Asking questions is not stupid. It's investigating, which is what all of us at the end of the day should be doing. We're not just going to say, and we shouldn't just say, that we believe everything, that we believe the narrative that the media portrays, we believe the information that we've been given, we believe in the official narrative. We're not just going to roll over, and we shouldn't just roll over and say, we're good, we have no questions, we believe you. Let's move on. People are going to ask questions, and it's important, and people need to realize that when it comes to conspiracy theories, it doesn't mean that you have to believe every single conspiracy that is out there or every theory that is out there. It means when someone says that they are considering a conspiracy theory is that they don't believe what the official narrative is saying. That's all it means. It just means we don't believe that what we're being told is the truth, because we believe that there are holes in the narrative. And so our job as individual thinkers, as Americans, for anything that we're being told is to poke holes in it, to be able to view it from multiple sides, multiple angles, so that we can eventually find the truth. So my job today is to not, or try not to, give you my idea or conspiracy theories behind the events of January 6th. My job today, of course, is to share my opinion, but is to lay out the facts that will hopefully help you be able to decipher, sift through the information, and come up with your own ideas or your own theories. That's the goal of today. But we're going to talk about a lot of different things, both in this episode and in episodes to come. So I want the record to be shown that just because you're a conspiracy theorist or you believe in conspiracy theories doesn't mean that you believe in all of them. It doesn't mean that you're not trusting. It doesn't mean that you're somebody who has a tinfoil hat on, somebody who is not believing in anything and everything. It just means that you're somebody who has the logic and the mindset to use that and be a critical thinker. That's it. And on a side note, I always like to tell myself and others around me, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I'm just a spoiler alert. Now, as a little joke, but kind of true, mostly true, let's dive into the events of January 6th, 2021. So, as we all know, and if you don't know, January 6th, 2021 is when the members of the House and the Senate meet together to go through the electoral process of casting their final votes and being able to confirm the newly elected president and vice president of the United States. So, January 6th, 2021. President Trump had just lost the second attempt to be sworn in as president of the United States, his second term, and he was beaten by Joe Biden, who was at that point president-elect, and Kamala Harris, who was vice president-elect. Now, pre-noon, before noon on January 6th, crowds gather for a rally that Trump was going to hold, and did hold, called Save America. At 12-1, Trump spoke to the members and the public who were there for the rally. And he kind of goes through some contradicting narratives or some contradicting speech. On one hand, he talks about being peaceful and protesting. And he talks about how they need to be patriotic and it needs to be patriotical. He also talks about how it needs to be peaceful. But then he also uses phrases like they need to fight like hell. Now, I'm indifferent. I don't hear the words fight like hell and think to myself, let's run, let's fight, let's lead an insurrection. I don't. You hear those terms all the time, right? Fight like hell. Now, you might hear those words and think, all right, let's take up arms. Let's storm the Capitol. Let's storm the field. Let's make sure that our voices are loud and that they're heard. I personally don't. But the media, after January 6th, painted those words by Trump as both being peaceful, but also calling for insurrection. Now, after the rally and after Trump had finished speaking, at 12:53, Trump points to the crowd and tells them to go towards the Capitol or Capitol Hill, the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. And around 12:53, after people have began walking and arriving to the feet or the foot of Capitol Hill, the west front barricade gets pushed down and the police lines that were there, the Capitol Police, those lines that they had formed, collapse. Now, around 2 p.m., so about an hour later, rioters began to breach the Capitol building. Now, you can watch so many different videos on this. You can watch them enter in through windows, enter in through doors. Of course, there were broken windows, broken doors, and other things that were broken during the Capitol being, I guess you could say, entered into, people gathering in. Mostly through all of and we've got thousands, hundreds of thousands of hours of CCTV and security camera footage. For the most part, minus a few instances here and there, it was peaceful. People entered the U.S. Capitol. They were calm. They were collected. They were viewing the historic building that they had now entered. And like I said, there were, of course, some instances where people were not so peaceful and not so solemn with their view of the Capitol building. Now, at 3 p.m., the acting Secretary of Defense, Christopher Miller, gives verbal approval for full activation of the Washington, D.C. National Guard. Remember this, because this is where things get a little crazy. Now, before we dive into all of this, I want to give a precursor again. Lots of information. I'm going to be all over the place. My job, and hopefully you're patient enough with me, is to make sure that I get it out clearly and concisely. And if I don't, I do apologize again. We're going to talk about two individuals today because they are individuals who not only were important the day of January 6th, but they were important because when the House committee, the January 6th committee, met and got sworn testimony by people who were sworn in, as we all are if we enter a court of law, to tell the truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God. These two individuals gave testimony multiple times that were contradicting to each other. But the media and the narrative that was painted tried to pin these two individuals and their testimonies to be able to paint the same picture, which is exactly what was being told to us by the media, Nancy Pelosi, and other countless American government officials. Now, these two people are Officer Harry Dunn, who was a Capitol Police member, and the second person was, if I can find it, here we go, David Lazarus. So I'm going to refer to those two individuals as Lazarus and Dunn. David Lazarus, it's important to note that he was head of Nancy Pelosi's security detail. But once again, he is an officer of the United States Capitol Police. Now, these two individuals were at the Capitol during the events. Where were they at during the Capitol, or where were they at during these events? It kind of changes because, of course, as you would expect, Capitol Police were extremely busy on the day of January 6th. They were moving not only congressional members and House members back and forth from their offices to safety from the members of the public who had stormed the Capitol. They were also trying to de-escalate the people that had now entered the Capitol building. They were making sure that they were fighting two different fronts, keeping members of the government safe and also making sure that they were keeping the general public safe and trying their best to de-escalate the situation. So here's where we dive into things. Officer Harry Dunn. If you look him up, if you look at photos of him, he's a big, broad, tall, black man. The reason why this is important is because he's not somebody that you would see and think, that's a police officer, but I don't really feel threatened by them. He's somebody that is extremely, in my opinion, just looking at him, can be pretty threatening to certain individuals. Now, Officer Harry Dunn, the day of, was walking around the Capitol building and was doing his best, in his words, to de-escalate the situation. But as we review CCTV and as we review security cameras, he was doing quite a lot of things that were the complete opposite of de-escalation. Now, he's somebody that trained Capitol Police members, and he, through all of their trainings, should know better than anybody on how to de-escalate a situation. But yet we see him on CCTV coming up and yelling, screaming at protesters from across the hall. We see him taking a water bottle from a woman sitting in the rotunda on a bench, drinking the water. He takes the water from her, snatches it pretty violently out of her hands, and walks away. We see him take another water bottle from somebody who was sitting on the ground, who was using it to get pepper spray out of their eye, takes it from them again, and walks away. And he was doing all of this while there were plenty of protesters and Capitol Police in attendance. And we see on the CCTV, which I wish I could show. I have the video. It's just hard for me to pull it up. Maybe I'll share it with you guys on the Instagram. We see a superior ranking officer of the Capitol Police point to Officer Harry Dunn and ask another member of the Capitol Police after he's taken these water bottles and violently snatched them, and just in general opinion, not de-escalating the situation. And somebody who probably shouldn't be around protesters, if you're showing signs that you're that angry and agitated, the senior ranking officer asks another officer to escort Dunn out of the rotunda, which they do. And this is where things get interesting. During this, we meet a few people. And these few people, what they were a part of is they were a part of a group called the Oath Keepers. Now, what is the Oath Keepers? The Oath Keeper was a militia, a group of individuals who were there the day of the January 6th riot or protest. And while they were there, they decided that they, of course, were in the Capitol building. They were there to be peacemakers. They did their best to make sure that they were de-escalating the situation. Even though they're not sworn-in members of any police organization, they were part of their own, which was called the Oath Keepers. There's 5 names and 5 individuals that we're going to talk about today. These 5 individuals, I'll pull up on my screen so that we can view them. You can have a little bit more context or clarity to who these people were. Let me show you who these individuals were. These are the 5 members of the Oath Keepers, and eventually they were on trial. We have Kelly Meggs, Stuart Rhodes, Jessica Watkins, Kenneth Harrelson, and Thomas Caldwell. Now, I bring up these names because I want you to remember them, and I want you to keep in mind as I explain what happens next. Remember, Officer Dunn has been escorted out of the rotunda after stealing water bottles and taking them from people as he's agitated and angry. He now moves to a different part of the Capitol building, and he is extremely angry. He's yelling. He comes running up the stairs, and at the top of the stairs, on the 2nd floor, he meets these 5 Oath Keeper members. When they come up on top of, or when they come up and they all meet together, Kenneth Harrelson, who goes by Ken Harrelson, is seen on video viewing Officer Dunn screaming at them. We have the video, and Officer Dunn talks about how there are Capitol Police members who are being beaten, that are being carried out on a stretcher, that the protesters are just overwhelming Capitol Police, and that they're causing so much destruction and harm to Capitol Police members. Now, that's just not true. It's not true. Even though Officer Dunn would later go on during the January 6th committee and testify that that was true, it wasn't true. Not a single U.S. Capitol Police member was taken off by a stretcher or on a stretcher that day. So what did these Oath Keepers do? These 5 individuals. After viewing how agitated and angry and just pissed off Officer Dunn was, they decided that they were going to position themselves between Officer Dunn and a different part of the protesters. These group of protesters that they were keeping Officer Dunn away from were a little bit more agitated. And so, in their own words, they wanted to keep peace and make sure that there wasn't any heavy argument or escalation of things between Officer Dunn, who on video has a rifle as a U.S. Capitol Police member, and the protesters who were a little bit more agitated and a little bit more angry. Now, let me show you a photo of what I'm talking about. So here we see Officer Dunn. He's here in the background. And then we have the 5 members of the Oath Keepers that are right here. Okay? This is them standing between Officer Dunn and the agitated members of the protest to make sure that there's not anything that's going on. Now let's talk about a timeline. Here's where the timeline happens. The interaction that you see here on this photo happens between the hour or the minutes of 2:44 p.m. and 2:50 p.m. And it happens on the House side of the U.S. Capitol or the Capitol Hill. Now, I want to explain to you and backtrack a little so we can have some context. I want to explain to you what the map of the United States Capitol looks like. This is Capitol Hill. which you have multiple buildings. Of course, you have the United States Capitol building, which is right here, kind of center to everything. And this is where you have a couple of different buildings or a couple of different people meet. As you can see here, you have the House wing, where members of the House of Representatives would have been meeting. Then you have over here, you have the Senate office building and the Senate office building again. So you have two different buildings that where it's where the United States Senate meets. And in between these two buildings, underground, is a tram system so that members of the Senate and members of the House can get to and from their office buildings and to and from Capitol Hill. Why is this important? Because we're going to talk about a timeline and we're going to talk about this distance. It's about a quarter of a mile. Okay. Nothing far, nothing crazy, but not something that you can bite off or chew just by walking in less than a few seconds or even a few minutes. Now, during these events, we've talked about Officer Dunn and what's happening. That's happening here at the United States Capitol building on the House side. Now, let's talk about Nancy Pelosi's security detail, the head of it, David Lazarus. Lazarus is over here in the Senate building. Why is he over there? He's escorting members of the Senate from the Capitol building to their office buildings to a secure location so that they can be safe from the protesters and everything that's happening over at the Capitol building. Now, at 2:43, as we read, shots were fired at the Capitol building. It's a horrific event. A couple people were injured and someone passed away. But shots ran out. At that point in time, Lazarus is over here. And he decides, because obviously his job is to keep public safety and also to protect Nancy Pelosi and her detail, as well as members of her staff, he decides to leave the Senate building and to make his way back towards the United States Capitol building. At 2:45, we can see on CCTV, he's moving to the Capitol building. Now, remember, this is at 2:45 as he makes his way back. At 2:44, we have, as we talked about before, this is now happening. Officer Dunn is now meeting against the Oath Keepers. Now, as this is all happening, Lazarus is moving from the Senate building back to the House side of the Capitol building or Capitol Hill. This event, as I stated before, took place between 2:44 and 2:50 p.m. As Lazarus is moving back, he finally gets back to the side of the House or the House side at 2:56 p.m. Here's where it gets interesting. At 2:55, these individuals can be seen exiting the Capitol building, completely exiting. So these 5 Oath Keepers are leaving the Capitol building at 2:55. At 2:56, a minute later, Officer Lazarus comes up and finally makes his way to the same staircase that we see here. Excuse me. And he meets Officer Harry Dunn. Now, this all is important to know and important to remember because of this one major detail that comes up during the House committee over January 6th. David Lazarus testifies and repeats himself 3 to 4 times during his testimony that he saw these 5 members of the Oath Keepers attacking verbally, not physically, but verbally, Officer Dunn at the top of this staircase. He saw them, he viewed them, he came up the stairs to help Officer Dunn so that they could de-escalate the situation. Now, based off of the information that I just told you, and based off of the new information that I just told you, or the testimony of these 2 officers, Officer Dunn and Officer Lazarus, that just can't be the case. That could not have happened. Why? If they are meeting Officer Dunn in this photo between the minutes of 2:44 and 2:50, and then leaving at 2:55, And Lazarus doesn't show up until 2:56, a minute after they're seen on camera, on CCTV, exiting the Capitol building. It doesn't really add up. It doesn't really add up. We all know the saying, right place, wrong time. In this case, wrong time, wrong place. Sorry. It just doesn't add up. Now, why is this important? Well, it's important because both Officer Dunn and Officer Lazarus swore an oath in and in front of members of our government that their testimonies were true. But here's the kicker. After the events, Officer Dunn was pulled off and was asked to talk about his experience. He was seen being interviewed by the FBI and was interviewed twice. The first time during his first interview, he told the FBI that those 5 members of the Oath Keepers were fine, that they were great, that they had no issues with each other, that everything was good. Those 5 Oath Keepers in their testimonies said that they were trying to keep peace and trying to keep Officer Dunn safe, which, critical thinking here, one would be able to say that would be true. They're trying to keep themselves in between Officer Dunn and the other agitated protesters so that they can keep peace. One Officer Dunn is a little agitated. You want to keep him separate from someone else who's agitated. Pretty logical to me. But then during his second interview with the FBI, Officer Dunn has a completely different testimony about these 5 members of the Oath Keepers. He claims that they were not keeping him safe. He completely says that that is a lie, that that is completely false. And he claims that they were aggravated and that they were agitators themselves and that they verbally attacked him. And then we have Officer David Lazarus' testimony, which, after a few tries, basically says the same thing that Officer Dunn said on his second interview, which is, I collaborate his story. It's true. They were agitating. And I viewed it. I was at the top of the stairs with Officer Dunn, and I viewed these 5 members attack verbally Officer Harry Dunn. Now, why is this important, right? We've gone down this huge rabbit hole. We've talked about these bunch of different things. We've talked about, some might say, a conspiracy theory. Why does this matter? Well, it matters for a couple of different reasons, and here's why. These 5 members of the Oath Keepers, they were all sentenced pretty severe and harsh sentences. And in a nutshell, the crimes to which they were sentenced for were crimes to overthrow the federal government that day. Now on TV, on CCTV camera, not once do we ever see any of these 5 members participate in anything that is violent, any violent acts towards any fellow protesters, Capitol Police members, towards anyone. And yet this was their sentencing. Kenneth Harlison was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. Kelly Maggs was sentenced to 12 years. Stuart Rhodes, 18 years. Jessica Watkins, 8.5. And Thomas Caldwell, he was sentenced but never ended up serving based off of time that he had already served before his actual sentencing. Why is this important? Well, if you're going to ask me, and you're going to ask for my opinion, I believe that this is a conspiracy theory. I believe that this is a conspiracy that the United States government framed the members of the Oath Keepers. I believe it to be true. Because how can you have cameras, which, here's an important fact, during the actual prosecution, their defense lawyers, the defense attorneys for these 5 members, those videos were not released to them. They were not given to the defense. Why? No idea. But I think that that is an extremely big red flag. You're not going to release all of the important evidence especially to the defense attorneys, so that they can defend their clients to their best and upright knowledge. And yet the prosecutors, they have those videos, but they just don't release them. That to me screams pretty damn loud. So to me, I believe it's a huge conspiracy, and that the government framed these members to use them as examples, to use them as, we don't do that. And if you do that as a member of this country, we're going to come after you. We're going to come after you to the fullest extent of the law, which, side note, I believe is fair. If you break the law here in America, we talked about it on last episode, you deserve punishment fits the crime, right? Now, do I think all of them were punished based off of the crimes that they, according to the government, committed? I think some of them were a little harsh. Now, all of them eventually, after Trump was sworn into his second term at the beginning of this year, he was able to do a sweeping pardon for all members who were arrested and sentenced and that were in jail for January 6th crimes. But to me, it just doesn't sit well. I believe that the stories, the contradicting stories between Nancy Pelosi, Harry Dunn, and David Lazarus, and many, many others who colluded together, painted the picture that they wanted to paint. Painted the picture that the members of the public that stormed the Capitol that day, that committed crimes, and I believe that there were some that did. There were some good people who made really bad decisions. There were good people that made good decisions, and bad people that just made bad decisions. But to me, to be able to show that these 5 individuals did what they say and what they were prosecuted for doing, it's not true. And that to me is a major, major problem. Now, the good news is we now have a second January 6th committee that has just recently been announced by the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson. He has now announced that a new House panel is being formed and is now going to take place. And in his words, it is a committee investigating the old committee so that we can now have a little bit more clarity to what actually happened and what took place on and after January 6, 2021. Now, here's a couple more things that are super important that I feel we all should learn about. Trump, during the January 6th attack, has been noted for saying and asking for the Capitol, the United States, the Washington, D.C. National Guard to be brought in so that they can keep peace and keep the crowds to a minimum in terms of the actions that they were going to take. Now, we know this is true because it's on record, but here's the one thing that we do need to make sure that is important. And this is where I believe the corruption goes down to an even darker and deeper level. Now, I don't like Nancy Pelosi. Ask anyone who's close to me, I just don't like her. I think she's a fraud. She's a crook. I think she's been in public she's been serving the public in the government for way too long. She needs to just retire and get the heck out of there. But I digress. I want to show you a couple of things that I feel like are important when we're talking about all of this. Nancy Pelosi tweeted just recently, I would add, the following. Donald Trump delayed deploying the National Guard on January 6th when our Capitol was under violent attack and lives were at stake. Now he's activating the D.C. Guard to distract from his incompetent mishandling of tariffs, healthcare, education, and immigration, just to name a few blunders. Now, second part of this tweet, we can talk about another time. We probably have talked about it already. First part of this tweet is what I want to focus on. She claims that Donald Trump delayed deploying the National Guard on January 6th. Here's where things get a little interesting. Now we have Chief of the DC Police, Stephen Sund, commented, or I don't know exactly how the Twitter world or X world works anymore, but he retweets or re-X's, once again, I don't know, He responds to this and says the following: "Ma'am, it is long past time to be honest with the American people. On January 3rd, I requested National Guard assistance." This is January 3rd, 2021. "But your sergeant at arms denied it. Under federal law, I was prohibited from calling them in without specific approval. The same day, Carol Corbin at the Pentagon offered National Guard support, but I was forced to decline because I lacked the legal authority. On January 6th, while the Capitol was under attack, and despite my repeated calls, your sergeant at arms again denied my urgent request for over 70 agonizing minutes, running it up the chain for your approval. When I needed assistance, it was denied. Yet when it suited you, you ordered fencing topped with Carcetina wire and surrounded the Capitol with thousands of armed National Guard troops." So going back to her tweet, President Trump delayed deploying the National Guard on January 6th when it was crucial that the Capitol that was under attack and lives were at stake and so many different things were just falling apart and it had to happen immediately. Please. We now learn, based off of this tweet by Chief Sund, that she delayed her response for 70 agonizing minutes. Now, to me, if I'm someone who thinks that the Capitol is under attack and that there are lives at stake, I get you have to run things up the proper chain of command. And there's a proper line of authority that has to back all of these things and make sure that they're okay, that they make sure that they happen in a timely order. I get all of that. I'm not just expecting the snap of a finger. It's our federal government, for crying out loud. That's not how things work, regardless if that's how we feel like they should. But 70 minutes of running it up the chain and taking all that time, that couldn't have been done faster. Never mind, he asked and requested on January 3rd, 3 days prior to the events of January 6th, he requested National Guard support. Never mind that, you took forever to actually give him a response and release the United States National Guard. That to me screams extremely loud. Now, hopefully this all makes sense. And hopefully this is all something that you feel, like I do, is so important, because how can we have a government if we don't trust them? Now, that opens up a major can that we're not going to get into today. And as you're going to find, as episodes get longer and episodes get more frequent, and as we talk about other topics, I'm not a big fan of the government, and I quite frankly don't trust them. I really don't. I feel our government has turned into something that it was never meant to be, that the federal government has too much power, that states do not have the power that they should have, and that things are not really set up how they should be according to the founding documents that we hold sacred and dear to this country's history. But once again, that's a story and a conversation for a different day. All in all, I am excited about the new House panel that was just announced, that is going to be a committee investigating the old committee. Because based off of everything that we've went over today and everything that we can view, because it's all public knowledge now, it's been 4 years, we can now see most of this, including security TV, security CCTV videos. We can see all the testimonies, we can hear the testimonies. Hell, for crying out loud, Officer Harry Dunn went on a book tour, wrote a book about it, and actually is running for office because of everything that's happened. He's now turned himself into quite the celebrity for somebody who, bore false testimony and quite frankly perjured himself under United States law. But that's neither here nor there. Hopefully you don't vote for him if you're in a state where he's running. But I am excited for this new panel and committee, because I believe that there are a lot of questions that are still unanswered. And as we talked about before, you can call me a conspiracy theorist. I'm fine with that. At this point, after what we've been through in the last 5 years, and after what we've been through just as a nation, I don't mind being called a conspiracy theorist. But I'm excited because I believe that answering those questions and asking those questions is deep in our soul, our bones as Americans. We have to ask those questions, because at the end of the day, you can call us names. You can say that we're denying the truth. You can say that we're denying the official narrative. Fine. Look at so many different events that have now come out that we have now known were faked, were falsified, did not actually happen, that were committed by the actual government that we claim to be led by. There's so many different things that we could point to where back when they happened, people questioned them and were called conspiracy theorists. And now we've got evidence and actual testimonies and hardcore facts that prove that those people who questioned the narrative of those events were right, that it should be questioned, and that it was never true or never correct from the very beginning. So take it for what you will. I think it's really important. And I think as time goes on, we're going to get some answers that point to some deep-rooted corruption. Now, that's my hope and that's my prayer. I don't know if it's actually going to happen, because at the end of the day, it's our government investigating our government, which, whether it's Republicans investigating Democrats or Democrats investigating Republicans, or same side investigating same side, call it what you will, very little trust overall to be given to anybody. Now, this next part of today's episode, we could do a full hour and a half, 2 hours on, but we're not going to dive deep into it. But I thought it was something that is important to share, because as I stated from the very beginning and the very first episode, this is going to be a podcast where we talk about politics, we talk about faith, and we talk about religion, and hopefully that's okay with you. Over the weekend, I was watching a video on Instagram, and the video was of a podcast host, a conservative person who I have been listening to for years. He's somebody that I quite enjoyed listening to. He's somebody that I looked up to, somebody that inspired me to start this show. And he came out with a video attacking Candace Owens and what she's doing right now in the investigation into the assassination of Charlie Kirk, which we'll do an episode on. There's a lot of information that's being brought out and being uncovered, not only by Candace Owens, but by tons of people. And I want to do an episode on it, but I want to make sure that we have all the facts in front of us and we have a lot of information. And of course, it's going to be an ongoing investigation, so we're not going to be able to give all the facts right up front. But we will do an episode on it. But this conservative podcast host, who is a Christian, he decided that he would state that if you don't listen to Candace Owens ever again, he's all right with you never listening to his show again. Which to me leads back to what we talked about at the very beginning. We shouldn't be accusing, calling names, or being rude or belittling people who are just asking questions. Now, I know right now, if you pay attention to everything that's going on, there's so many different people that are upset with others who are, quote unquote, just asking questions. To me, that's never been a problem. I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that at all. If you're asking questions, it means you're somebody who's actually searching for and seeking the truth, seeking light, seeking knowledge. And as we know from the Bible, from the scriptures, that is something that we are called to do, not only as God's children, but as Christians. We're called to search out truth and light and knowledge. So if you're asking questions, you're doing exactly what we've been commanded to do. As followers of Christ, as children of God, we've been placed on this earth to find out truth and to find knowledge for ourselves. It's the whole reason why we have agency. Now, when he said that, I decided to comment on the video, and my comment wasn't anything attacking him. It was simply put, plain and simple, that he was a hero of mine, and that it saddened me to hear him target and attack a fellow Christian, a fellow believer in Christ, but somebody who is also a fellow conservative, Candace Owens, for her investigation into what happened when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. I said that it saddened me, and that if that was his offer, I would take him up on his part of the offer, and that I would no longer listen to him, and I would continue to double down and listen to Candace Owens even more, because I think there's nothing wrong with asking questions. I think there's nothing wrong with doing that. Now, I posted my comment. I got off Instagram. I went back to work. I continued with my day. My comment got quite a bit of traction on that post. It got, I think, 50 or 60 likes. It had multiple people reply to it, and there were multiple replies that were both agreeing with me and replies that disagreed with me, which, hey, totally fine with it. We all have our agency and our own opinions, and that's beautiful. One of the posts or replies to my comment on the post was from a lady who I'm not going to name her name and give her name because it's not important. But in my Instagram bio, I have tagged the church and the faith that I believe in, which I am a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And so in my Instagram bio, on my personal account, I have that I am a proud member of the Church of Jesus Christ. Well, she commented on my comment, replied to it, and said something along the lines that maybe Candace and I are praying to the same God, which is why we're a little confused. Now, call it a Christian bashing another Christian, call it someone just sharing their opinion. I don't care. I wasn't offended by that. I wasn't ticked off by it. I'll be honest with you. I wrote and deleted a couple different spicy comments to reply back to her comment, but I decided to look at her Instagram, which it was public, but in her bio, she shows that she is a big Christian, not only speaker, but author, a member of a church where she seems to play a predominant role in. But what I found to be so ironic was in her bio, she is writing another book, and it says in her bio that her new book would be coming out, which is entitled the following: When Christians Hurt You, How to Move Through Pain and Betrayal into Deeper Intimacy with God. Now, the reason why I feel the need to talk about this is not to talk about the irony behind someone who attacked me for my religious beliefs and my faith, who's also writing a book about how to move past when Christians hurt you and find a deeper relationship with God. I think the book sounds like a really good book. And the day and age that we live in, it's probably a good thing that, we pick up a copy and read it so that we can maybe hear what her thoughts are. That's besides the point. My point of the matter is, how far have we fallen as a society when Christians decide to attack other Christians just for their faith? When Christians decide that just because you don't believe in the doctrine that I believe in, that you're not a part of the church that I'm a part of, you're not a Christian. That you're not really a follower of God. You're not really a follower of Christ. And in her words, maybe I'm just praying to the wrong God altogether. Now I get Christian faiths have different beliefs. And I get that the faith that I choose to believe in and the church that I choose to be a part of is one that has a history of people calling it not a Christian church and not a church at all and a cult and all of these other horrible things and horrible names that are just untrue. But what I find funny about all of this is the day and age that we live in, funny and sad, the day and age that we live in, us as Christians, regardless of what faith, sect, or religion that we're a part of, us as Christians who unite under the children of God and under fellow believers and disciples and followers of Christ, we shouldn't be attacking each other. We should move forward together. We should rely on each other. We should link arms with one another. We should put aside our differences in theology and religious beliefs and come unite under the belief of we're Christians. You believe in Jesus Christ. He's your Lord and Savior. He's mine. At the end of the day, I personally feel that that is one of the most important things, we can be doing in the world that we live in. That as the light that is the gospel of Jesus Christ gets dimmer and dimmer because the darkness of the world gets darker and bigger, we have to hold true to the beliefs that we have as Christians. And I support anybody who has a religious belief, anybody who decides to believe in anything. And I, of course, support anyone who decides to believe in Jesus Christ and Heavenly Father, who believes in the Bible to be the Word of God, who believes in other scriptures to believe the Word of God. I back you. I support you. You have a friend with me. Now, hopefully you got something out of today's episode. I know it was kind of all over the place, from Christian beliefs and talking about that experience I had to the events of January 6, 2021. But I think all in all, it's an important discussion that we have to have. Now, if you want to get your tinfoil hats on and you want to be able to talk about other conspiracy theorists that I believe in or conspiracy theories that I believe in, let's do it. Let's do more episodes. Let's talk about it. Now, I've always said it. If you want to hear a topic, please comment on the Instagram, comment on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Rumble, Instagram, message me. Let me know what you guys want to hear talked about on this podcast, because at the end of the day, my job is to do this for you guys, right? I get enjoyment and fulfillment out of it. But more importantly, my goal, as I stated from the first episode, is to be able to share messages with you guys and to share information with you so that you can become a little bit more knowledgeable and wake up to what's happening in our state, in our country, and in the world. So, as always, like, subscribe, comment, share. Anything you can do to engage with our pages and profiles on any of our accounts is appreciated. And of course, remember that the future is one that we build together, because we are the future. I'm Bryce Wheeler, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining us.